The most powerful city on the North American continent is not New York. It is not Mexico City, not as you know it. It is Tenochtitlan. Population 12 million. It sits on the same island where the Aztec Triple Alliance built its capital. And it sits there because something very small happened, 5 centuries before Columbus sailed, on a cold North Atlantic shore. A Norse trader got sick. And a Beothuk community, over the course of 20 years of intermittent contact, didn't die. In our timeline, the Americas lost 90% of their population within a century of sustained European contact. Not to warfare. To smallpox, measles, typhus, old world diseases for which indigenous immune systems had no preparation. Hernán Cortés didn't conquer the Aztec Empire. A pandemic did. He just arrived to collect what it had already killed. In this timeline, that pandemic is blunted. Not eliminated. Blunted. The Norse contact begins the exposure process 500 years early, at a pace immune systems can adapt to. By 1492, when Spanish ships reach the Caribbean, the death rate from European disease in the Americas is 40%, rather than 90%. That is still catastrophic. Millions of people die. But an Aztec empire with 60% of its population intact is not the same thing as an Aztec empire with 10%. And the Spanish are about to find out what the difference means. The Norse reached North America around 1000 AD. We know this. The settlement at Lance Auxiliary Meadows in Newfoundland is a confirmed archaeological fact: timber-framed buildings, iron-smithing tools, Norse artifacts recovered from the site. They called the land Vinland. They tried to settle it. In our timeline, they couldn't. Conflict with the indigenous peoples they called Skraelings ended the attempt within a few years, and the contact was too brief and too violent to transmit disease at epidemic scale. In this timeline, a different Norse leader makes a different call. His name, by tradition, might be something like Thorfinn. He is a trader, not a warrior. He sees that the people coming to the settlement's edge want iron tools and have furs. He sees that his settlement needs food. He makes the obvious commercial calculation. The trading relationship lasts 3 generations. Norse ships return every few years. Diseases come with them. The Beothuk and later the Mi'kmaq peoples of the northeastern coast experience illness waves, terrible ones, with deaths that devastate individual communities. But they survive. And they adapt. And crucially, those adapted immune responses spread south and west through existing trade networks, the Mississippi Exchange networks, the Gulf Coast connections, the routes reaching all the way to Mesoamerica, decades and then centuries before any Spanish ship sails. This is the biology. By the time Columbus arrives in 1492, the population of Mesoamerica is not immunologically naive. It is partially prepared. 40% immortality is still a civilization-shattering event. The Aztec Triple Alliance loses perhaps 3 million people in the decade after first contact. Social structures fracture. Supply chains break. Priests interpret the dying as religious catastrophe. But the state apparatus survives. The military survives. Moctezuma II is still alive in 1520, and his empire, battered, grieving, furious, is still fielding armies. Cortes lands in 1519 with 600 soldiers and 16 horses. He is not conquering a ghost empire. He is walking into a trap. Cortes arrives expecting what European explorers had found in the Caribbean: fractured, decimated peoples who could be converted and enslaved and their labor captured. He finds instead a city that rivals any in the world, governed by leaders who have had 2 decades to observe what the Spanish do to peoples who let them pass the coast. Word travels. The Caribbean is not a secret. Indigenous trade networks that predate Columbus by centuries have been passing descriptions of the new arrivals, their ships, their weapons, their habits, northward and westward for 20 years. Moctezuma knows what happened to the Taino people of Hispaniola. He has received that intelligence. He has drawn conclusions. The story in our timeline, Cortes exploiting Aztec beliefs that he was the returning god Quetzalcoatl, is largely a later Spanish invention. Aztec religious thought was sophisticated and pragmatic. Moctezuma was an experienced political operator who had expanded the empire and navigated its complex tributary relationships for decades. The idea that he simply gave up his empire because of a mistaken divine attribution was a self-serving Spanish narrative. In this timeline, without the psychological shock of plague annihilating 90% of the population, there is no paralysis at the top. The Spanish are allowed to approach. They are studied. Their technology is assessed. Then they are offered a choice. Cortés is given two options through interpreters. He may trade, on Aztec terms, with Aztec overseers, at prices the Aztec merchant class sets. Or he may leave. He chooses neither. He attempts the gambit that worked in our timeline, recruiting local allied peoples who resent Aztec tribute, building a coalition to attack Tenochtitlan from within. The allies he recruits, the Tlaxcalans, the Totonacs, have also heard what Spain does to its allies once the fight is over. Some still join him, for their own political reasons. But not enough. And the Aztec intelligence networks, which in our timeline were disrupted by the chaos of plague, are still functioning. The ambush at the Noche Triste of our timeline, the night Cortés fled Tenochtitlan, becomes in this timeline something different. Cortés never gets inside the city. He is stopped at the causeway, outnumbered 50-1, and after a brief battle that kills a third of his men, he retreats to the coast. He sends to Cuba for reinforcements. The reinforcements bring more disease. Another wave kills. The Aztec death toll rises to perhaps 40% over 5 years. But 60% is still alive. Still fighting. And now the Aztec leadership has captured Spanish soldiers, interrogated them, examined their weapons, dissected their horses, and reached a conclusion that will shape the next 3 centuries of their civilization. European technology is learnable. The Aztec Triple Alliance was not a primitive society. It had a standing army of tens of thousands, a professional diplomatic corps, a complex tribute system, a sophisticated agricultural base, and a merchant class, the Pochteka, who were already expert at long-range trade intelligence. What it lacked was gunpowder weapons and ocean-going ships. The Spanish solved both problems by losing soldiers and ships at the coast of Mexico. By 1535, Aztec craftsmen have reverse-engineered functional muskets. They are crude, heavy, slow to reload, prone to misfiring in rain. But they work. And the Aztec metallurgical tradition, which had sophisticated bronze working but not iron smelting, now gets introduced to iron and steel through captured Spanish equipment. Spain does not give up. But Spain also cannot sustain the casualty rate required to conquer a continent where the population recovered from plague. The Spanish crown, focused on the Atlantic trade routes and the enormous wealth flowing from South America, where the Andean civilizations, similarly partially immunized, are proving similarly resistant, begins to think in terms of trade rather than conquest. A formal treaty is signed in 1548. Spain recognizes the sovereignty of the Aztec Triple Alliance over its existing territory. The Aztec Empire recognizes Spanish trading rights in designated coastal settlements. Missionaries are permitted inside the gates of those settlements. They are not permitted inside Aztec cities. The Aztecs, for their part, start building ships. This is the moment the Spanish negotiators failed to prevent. The 1548 treaty said nothing about naval construction because the Spanish diplomats thought of it as obviously impossible, the technical gap too large, the timescale too long. They were wrong by 30 years. By 1580, Aztec trading ships are operating in the Caribbean. By 1600, they have reached the Atlantic coast of South America, connecting with the Andean federations that have similarly survived and resisted European conquest. By 1620, an Aztec vessel reaches Spain. The crew are received as curiosities, then as diplomats. Then, when the goods they carry, cacao, rare feathers, exotic medicines, and notably a cargo of gold purchased at commercial rates, become clear in their volume and quality, as trading partners who cannot be ignored. Europe has spent a century assuming the Americas were a resource to extract. The Americas are about to start asking for something in return. The Aztec embassy of 1625 creates a crisis in European diplomatic protocol that has no real parallel in our timeline. Europe had built its entire intellectual framework for dealing with the Americas on the premise of civilizational superiority. The Papal Bull in Turkey Terror of 1493 had divided the New World between Spain and Portugal on the assumption that its inhabitants were subjects to be converted and governed. 300 years of colonial theory rested on the idea that indigenous peoples were fundamentally different in kind, less civilized, less rational, less able to govern themselves. The Aztec diplomats arriving in Seville are dressed in silk, fluent in Spanish, carrying letters of credit from a state with a larger population and GDP than the Spain that claimed sovereignty over them, and asking to renegotiate the terms of the 1548 treaty. The negotiation takes 4 years. The Treaty of Seville of 1629 is the document that formally creates the structure of the alternate Atlantic world. Spain retains its Caribbean island colonies and coastal trading settlements. The Aztec Empire and the Andean Confederation, negotiating jointly, having established formal diplomatic relations with each other, are recognized as sovereign states with whom commercial treaties, not tribute arrangements, will govern trade. The missionary question is deferred indefinitely. The Portuguese are furious. The Dutch, who have been watching and taking notes, immediately dispatch an embassy to Tenochtitlan. The Aztecs receive them warmly. The trade is not equal. European manufactured goods, especially printing, glass, clockwork, and later steam technology, flow to the Americas at prices that favor European producers. The intellectual technology gap is real, even as the military gap closes. Aztec and Andean rulers who want access to European technology have to pay for it in commodities priced according to European demand. But there is a critical difference from our timeline: the profits accumulate on both sides of the ocean. Indigenous merchants get rich. Indigenous states collect tariffs. Indigenous treasuries fund the acquisition of more technology. The feedback loop runs in both directions. There is no encomienda system. No plantation slavery of the Caribbean variety. The labor that produces goods for the Atlantic trade is indigenous labor compensated at local rates, not ideal by any measure, exploitative in its own ways, but not the chattel slavery that defined the Atlantic economy of our world. The African slave trade does not happen. Or rather, it begins as Spanish and Portuguese traders attempt to import enslaved Africans to their coastal settlements. But without the plantation system of the interior, without millions of acres of conquered land to farm, the demand is too limited to create the industrial machinery of the Middle Passage. Perhaps 2 million Africans are enslaved and transported to the Americas in this timeline, versus 12 million in ours. Still a crime. But not the civilizational catastrophe that shaped our modern world. The world in 2026 has roughly the same number of people as ours, around 9 billion. The same basic physical geography. The same fundamental human drives. And a set of power relationships, languages, and cultural forms that would be almost unrecognizable to a visitor from our timeline. North America has no United States as we know it. The eastern seaboard was colonized by Europeans. English, French, Dutch settlers established themselves along the Atlantic coast from the 1600s onward. But they arrived in a continent where the large inland civilizations were armed, politically coherent, and watching. The colonial settlements are real and influential. They are not in charge of the continent. What emerged over 4 centuries is a patchwork. European majority coastal states from Maine to Florida, recognized trading partners of the Aztec Commonwealth, indigenous nations with varying degrees of territorial sovereignty across the interior, and mixed heritage buffer states where the cultures met and compounded. The entity that eventually formed from the English coastal settlements, call it the Atlantic Republic, is a mid-sized power of about 80 million people, wealthy, commercially sophisticated, and entirely conscious that it exists at the edge of a much larger civilization sphere. Tenochtitlan in 2026 is the 4th largest city on Earth. Its political structure is a constitutional federation, the Aztec Commonwealth, formally established in 1889 after a century of territorial expansion and treaty-making, now encompasses all of Mesoamerica and parts of North America. The legislature meets in a building whose architectural tradition descends continuously from Aztec civic architecture rather than being a copy of European parliamentary forms. Nahuatl is the official language, Spanish is the first commercial language, English is widely spoken in the northeastern states. The Pochteka tradition, the Aztec merchant class, produced what might be the most sophisticated commercial legal system in the world. 5 centuries of continuous development, incorporating European contract law when it was useful and discarding it when it wasn't, produced a body of commercial jurisprudence that the rest of the world has been quietly borrowing from since the 1900s. The Andean sovereignty developed differently from the Aztec Commonwealth, more federalized, more consensus-oriented, with a political tradition rooted in the Ayllu community structure rather than the Triple Alliance's tributary model. It is, in 2026, a democracy of sorts, competitive elections, genuine civil liberties, a free press. But the institutions look nothing like European parliamentary democracy. The conceptual vocabulary of governance developed from different roots, and the differences are real and visible to anyone paying attention. Technology in this world is roughly comparable to ours, delayed by perhaps 30 to 40 years in computing and biotechnology, ahead of ours in some areas of material science where the Andean metallurgical tradition contributed insights that took our world's chemists an extra century to reach independently. The internet exists. Social media exists. The particular flavor of algorithmic attention manipulation that has done so much damage in our world exists here too. It emerged from different software cultures, speaks different languages, but exploits the same human psychology. The Aztec Commonwealth had its own social media catastrophe around 2015, its own political polarization crisis, its own arguments about truth and misinformation. Human social dynamics are not solved by surviving colonialism. What this world does not have, the transatlantic slave trade at industrial scale. The Middle Passage. The plantation system that built much of the modern American and Caribbean economy. The specific trauma of African American history as we know it. What it also does not have, the particular creative explosion of African diasporic culture, the musical and literary and spiritual traditions that emerged from the specific crucible of American slavery and survival. Jazz, blues, hip-hop, the African American church tradition. None of these exist in this form. Something else does. But the specific forms that came from that specific suffering are gone with the suffering. No suffering is cost-free to remove. The global population of people of African descent who were enslaved in the Americas is perhaps 2 million rather than 30 million. The descendants of those 2 million are still here, still shaped by that history, still navigating its aftermath. The scale is smaller. The injustice was not. Whether the world without the Middle Passage is better is not a question with a clean answer. It is 28 million people who were not enslaved. It is also the loss of everything those 28 million people and their descendants made. History does not offer refunds. It offers different costs. The Norse trader whose pragmatism started all of this probably thought he was making a good deal on fur. He was not thinking about Tenochtitlan in 2026. He was not thinking about the Atlantic slave trade that wouldn't happen, or the one that would. He was thinking about whether the people at the edge of the settlement would accept iron nails for beaver pelts. He traded. He left. His ship brought pathogens that killed people in that community for 20 years. He never knew. The community survived it. The immunity spread south through networks he couldn't have known existed. Here is what this timeline asks us to sit with. The Americas were not conquered because Europe was better. They were conquered because Europe was sick first and the Americas weren't. Guns and steel and horses mattered. But the deciding factor was germs. The conquest of the Americas was, at root, a biological accident that we have spent 5 centuries rationalizing as destiny. In the alternate world, the accident doesn't happen. And what follows is not a utopia, it is a different negotiation, with different winners and different losers and different things created from different suffering. The civilizations that survived are not gentle. The trade that develops is not fair. The technology gap is exploited by those who have it. Power finds ways to be power. But the specific catastrophe of the Americas, the 90% population loss, the plantation system, the colonial project that reshaped 2 continents in the image of the societies that conquered them, that specific catastrophe does not happen. And the world that results is genuinely alien to the assumptions we inherited from it. What would you trade to live in that world? And what would you give up that you don't yet know you'd miss? Until the vault opens again, subscribe to the Alternate Archive.